And good morning. It's time for us to talk about our emotional healing. Talk about how our emotions impact our healing. Let me make sure everything is straight, make sure everything is right. As usual, I would like to start with a personal libation, start with an honoring of the ancestors that made this possible for me. I salute and recognize my father, Curly Parhams, and though my mother is still here, I salute and recognize my mother, Polly Parhams, and I go back through our lineage to recognize Laura Jackson Young, Pledge Young, Versi B. Good, Parhams Good, and Charlie Parhams. Those are my immediate ancestors, and I'm thankful to them for making me possible and therefore making this possible. Our subject today is emotional healing. Well, not emotional healing, but our subject is the impact our emotions have on our health and on our healing. So we're going to talk about first about what emotions are, what the primary emotions are, and then we're going to go into the emotional centers and talk about how those emotional centers impact our health and what we can do about it. First of all, emotions are energy. Energy is neutral, but when we experience our emotions, we impact how that energy is going to flow through us, whether it's going to have the positive impact or whether it's going to have a negative impact. And as I studied, I found so many different understandings of what emotions there are. There are some very basic emotions that we experience, and from all the study, I came to 5 that seem to be the most basic. We have love, joy, anger, sadness, and fear. So I'll talk a little bit about each one of those because they're the two, love and joy, are the positive emotions, and anger, sadness, and fear are considered the negative emotions, but all of those have a negative aspect and all of those have a positive aspect. So we'll look at the negative aspect of love and joy, and we'll look at the positive aspects of anger, sadness, and fear, because we know what the negative aspects of them are, of anger, sadness, and fear are. We'll touch on those as we go, and we know what the positive aspects of love and joy are, but we don't really stop and consider the negative aspect of love or the negative aspect of joy. So when we're looking at love, the negative aspect of love is over loving. And some of us have probably known some people who were overprotective of their children. That's an aspect of over loving someone. When you over love, you extend your love to the point where this person can't individuate, they can't be themselves, they can't go their own way and be who they were meant to be in this life. So over loving tends to constrict who they can be. It tends to hold them back. So love has both the positive and the negative aspect. The same thing happens with joy. Now, each of these emotions manifests itself in our bodies. Joy, you've heard people say, "Oh, I'm overjoyed." Well, there's actually such a thing as being overjoyed. You can have too much joy. Joy it manifests in your body through a fluctuating heartbeat. It becomes very rapid. You might, your palms might begin to sweat. You, any, you have these active reactions to being joyful. Well, overjoy could make your heart actually begin to palpitate and become irregular. If that happens and you don't manage to rein it in and manage to balance yourself back out, then you actually could have a heart attack. You can overjoy yourself into sickness and or death if it becomes consistent, if you're doing this on a regular basis. So that's the negative aspect of love and joy. And then we look at anger, sadness, and fear. They have their positive aspects. Anger can serve to help you to look at a situation, analyze that situation to be unhealthy, unjust, and make you take action to rectify that situation. And that's what's happening throughout the country. We're seeing situations where people are being violated, people are being killed and abused, and people, oftentimes the person, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, drunk driving is an example of that. These are two mothers whose children were killed by drunk drivers. They were angry, they were hurt, so they established a foundation to help change laws around drunk driving. And it has made an impact in our society. The same thing with sadness. Now, their sadness, they could have lingered in their grief and mourned the deaths of their sons, and they did mourn. That's the positive side of sadness. You mourn. You express that grief, because if you don't express it and it turns inward, it can turn on your body. It can lodge itself in your organs and you become ill. That's where dis-ease comes from. The same with fear. So we've talked about the positive aspect of anger. It can move you to action. It can move you to work toward justice, toward rectifying the situation that angered you. It can move us toward expressing the grief that is necessary when there's a loss, when there is pain. And then there's also fear. Fear is, all of these are survival emotions: anger, sadness, and fear. Fear is the most survival emotion, because fear, it was originally designed when we were designed to help save our lives. If you're in a situation where a car is barreling down the road at you, you naturally want to either freeze, flee, or run. So that's freeze, flight, or fight. So I said run, but you want either freeze, flight, or fight. So those are the three reactions to the negative emotions. If a car is barreling down the street at you, if you freeze, you just may get hit. But out of fear, we tend to run. That's what saves our lives. I recently moved to the South, and in Los Angeles, we didn't have wild animals. We didn't have creatures coming at us on a consistent basis. But back here, because we're living in the country, we've encroached on their space. So they come out now and then. And I've seen coyotes run across our land. I've seen foxes, and there's wildlife. So to survive, we have to either fight, take flight, or freeze. Freezing is pretty much going to get us harmed. So if a fox is coming toward me, I'm either going to fight. If he's between me and the door, we're fighting. Or I'm going to take flight. So these are survival skills that help us deal with those fears. The problem comes when we hang on to those fears. Say you've been exposed to in youth, you were thrown into a pool of water. It's a scary situation at that time. It forces you to splash around so that you, if you can't swim, splash around till you get to the edge of the water. That is that's the fighting instinct. You're saving your own life. But if for the rest of your life you're afraid of water, every time you're around a body of water, your heart starts pounding and you start your kidneys start going crazy, everything goes haywire about you, then you're going into the negative aspect of fear. You're going into an unhealthy, unbalanced aspect of fear. So all of those emotions can either be negative or they can be positive. So all the emotions, these are just the 5 basic emotions. All the other emotions we experience are a derivative of those emotions or a combination. For example, jealousy. Jealousy is an emotion, and it's a combination usually of anger, and it's a combination of fear. So you're angry at the fact that you're possibly going to lose something, someone, or someone has something you don't have, combined with the fear of loss, the fear that you won't get what they have. It's a combination. So all the other emotions are a combination or a derivative of these original basic emotions. Another example is depression. It's an extension of sadness. If we don't express the sadness and perhaps even go get help when we're experiencing sadness, we can go into a depression, experience melancholia. It's necessary sometimes to go get help. There's nothing wrong with going to get help. There's nothing wrong with reaching out to friends, and no one but you can tell you how long is healthy to be sad. You may be sad for the rest of your life over the loss of a child or the loss of a spouse. It's all in how you respond to it, how balanced you're able to be in that loss. So now that we've talked about the positive aspect of the negative emotions, let's talk about how the emotions affect our bodies. Now, if we are able to balance those emotions in our bodies, we're able to stay healthy. Now, when I first started learning about this about 25 years ago, I was told that 50% of all dis-ease that originates in the body is emotionally based. And later on, I learned it was about 75%. And now I'm hearing it's 100%. Emotions are powerful energy that flows through our body, and it's meant to flow through. It's not those emotions, the lower emotions anyway, are not meant to get into our bodies and just stay. They're not meant to reside forever. You're not meant to take on fears and just hang on to them. You're not meant to get angry and just stew in the anger at someone who has done something to you, or to be sad and let it take hold of your organs. And typically what I've heard is that it takes about 2 years for dis-ease to manifest in your body when you start to hang on to those negative emotions. So it's necessary that we remain balanced and actually let those emotions flow through as energy flows through. Energy becomes stagnant when it starts to just sit, and stagnant energy isn't healthy. So we want to keep those emotions moving, we want to keep those emotions balanced, and recognize that your body talks to you. Your body will let you know if something has started to get out of balance. You can feel it when you start to get a backache. You know something has started to get out of balance. When you feel your kidneys, your urine starts to turn yellow even though you're drinking enough water. If you're not drinking enough water, and start paying attention to what else is going on in your life. Maybe you're angry with someone and you're holding on to it. Maybe you are sad. Maybe you are thinking about, you're worrying too much. These are emotions that can impact your health. They can impact your bones. They can impact your muscles. They can impact every organ on your body. Your skin is the largest organ on your body. People who break out in rashes a lot might, it would serve you to think about what you're worrying about, what is stressing you, because stress is one of those emotions that manifests itself through rashes, through uh, uh, nervousness. So we need to start looking at what our emotions are doing when we start having dis-ease in our bodies. Now, I'll go through our emotional centers. I'll talk about our emotional centers and what parts of the body they impact. Now, I'm using a book called Awakening Intuition by Mona Lisa Schultz. This is actually what it looks like. That's actually the cover of the book. And she talks about our emotional centers, and they are very similar to our chakras. Now, if you're not familiar with chakras, you don't have to know about chakras to understand what I'm going to say about the emotional centers. I'm saying that because some people who do know about chakras may be listening, and there is a strong correlation between the emotional centers and how the chakras are aligned. There's a very strong similarity, but there's an even stronger similarity between seven the 7-year cycles of our lives. Each 7-year cycle from the time we're born, we go through an emotional growth period. And these align very much with the emotional centers. Now, this is not something that Lisa Schultz said in her book, but this is what I've gleaned over the years. So I'm going to go through her emotional centers, and we'll talk about how, I'll give some examples as I go, because I recognized some situations I had been through that were very much aligned with these emotional centers. The first emotional center it affects the body structure, the skeletal system, the blood, and the immune system. So if you're looking at your body, we're moving from our base, which is around the genital area. When we're first born, everything centers around our base needs. Now, that doesn't mean it's sexual, but it's our base needs, and it comes from our base, which is in the genital area. So the first emotional center deals with our structure, the very foundation. And this is how you can know which emotional center is being impacted based on what part of your life is experiencing imbalance. So the structural part of our life deals with our dependence and independence, our helplessness or feeling capable, our hopelessness or hopefulness, our fearlessness or fearfulness, and our trust or mistrust of others in our world. And see, during that first 7 years of life, that's when we're learning who to trust. We're learning that family is that first family is the family of trust. We're learning to be fearless of others entering into our circles, because that's when people are coming to see the baby, and we're learning who to fear, who not to fear, who to trust, who not to trust. And that all has to do with the structure of our lives at that point. And we also learn to be independent. People call it the terrible twos when a child starts saying, no, no, I'm not going to do that. No. Well, it's not terrible twos. It's when they're developing their independence at that point. So when you start experiencing something encroaching on your independence, or you are in a situation where you can't trust the people around you, whether it's on your job, whether it's in your family or among your friends or colleagues, these are these are part of your first emotional center issues. So you pay attention to that, because it can impact your skeletal system, it can impact your circulatory system, it can impact your immune system. Okay, if those get out of balance. The second emotional center is the pelvis. So there are two parts of the drives that come through the pelvis. There's the search for fulfillment in the world, so that has to do with sex, money, creativity, and fertility. So in the second set of 7 years, 8 through 14, that's when people start developing their, establishing what their creative genes are about, what they like doing, and they start just exploring sex, and whether it's amongst themselves, exploring the sexuality of your own body, and they develop the awareness of the value of money, and they develop the awareness of the want to have a family. That happens between that 8 to 14 years. And there's another aspect to that. The other part of that emotional center has to do with relationships and the capacity to be individuated. Again, we talk about individuation and being on your own, the ability to be intimate with other people, and the ability to be independent, to think independently. All of that has to do with the second emotional center. And that's what's happening during that 8 to 14 year period. You start to individuate, you start to pull apart from, you're no longer a part of your parents' world as much. You start to have your own interests. You start to want to go hang out with your friends more. That's what's happening during that second set of 7 years. And when you start having problems with being able to individuate, being able to establish relationships with other people, that's when you start to recognize that you have to find that balance. There's something emotional about that. You may just discover that you're having issues in your gastrointestinal tract, your bladder, your urinary tract, or your lower back, or your reproductive organs. Those are the parts of the body that manifest imbalance in those areas. So pay attention to those. If you start having bladder infections, start looking at the relationships you're having. If you start having lower back problems, one thing Louise Hay, another well-known author, has said, she has a diagram of what body parts are being impacted and affected by different emotions. And she says the lower back has to do with a lack of financial support. Your back is what supports your whole body. So when the lower back has problems, it has to do with financial support. So there's a connection between all of these dis-eases and our emotions. So we have to pay attention to what's going on in our emotions and when we experience issues with the gastrointestinal tract, the bladder, urinary tract, lower back, and reproductive organs. The third center is the middle abdomen and the gastrointestinal tract, and it covers the intestines, the stomach, the pancreas, kidneys, spleen, liver, and gallbladder. Now, these are associated with issues concerning the role we choose in society, acquiring and harnessing the skills for that role, and becoming competent in a line of work. And again, that lines up with the next set of 7 years. So that's 15 to 21. That's typically when we're choosing careers, we're choosing what we want to do with our lives, and we're finding out whether we can support ourselves. We're getting out on our own from our families. Some of us are still in college, but even at that point, we're looking at what we're going to do with our lives. We're looking at what kinds of careers we're going to go into. We're preparing for those careers. So when you start having problems in the area of your gallbladder or your intestines or your stomach, and you notice when you're getting out, you're starting to venture out on your own, you start getting nervous. And where do you feel that? You have quote unquote butterflies in your stomach. That's a natural reaction. That nervousness is an extension of fear. It's normal. But if it just sticks with you, it just stays with you, that you're nervous all the time, you're worried all the time, that's when people start getting ulcers. That's when people start getting hernias and all kinds of issues that take place when you're constantly worried, you're constantly in fear. It can set up in other parts, in other organs in your body. It can set up in your kidneys. It can set up in your intestines. When you have a blockage, you're not letting some stuff go. You're holding on to issues. It could be anger, it could be worry, but you're holding on, and you become constipated, holding on, literally holding on to crap that you should be letting go of. That's the third emotional center. Now, the fourth emotional center is the chest area. Now, that area houses the heart, the lungs, the esophagus, and the breasts. Now, the emotions that go with that are the expression of love and of passion. So when we have it, again, it goes back to that to the 7-year cycle. People are starting to look toward getting married at that time. You're developing passions toward other people, toward your work. But if you start to have problems in those areas, you may have problems in your marriage, you may have problems with love, you may have problems in even in family relationships, but it all centers around the heart, the lungs. So if you develop asthma, if you develop issues around not being able to breathe, if you develop issues in the breasts, you want to start looking at how much are you able to express that love? Are you having problems expressing that love? And remember, I said it typically takes a couple years before it actually shows up. So it's not just what's going on now, it's what has happened in the past. You have to look at what has happened before, and maybe something that has happened you're hanging on to. Maybe you've had an issue with a love that you weren't able to let go of. So many of us go through our first love during that period of 15 to 21. That's your first love, And if it doesn't work, you might still be hanging on to that. And that might manifest in your breasts. That might manifest in your heart. You might develop some breathing issues. Or people who get hiccups all the time, your esophagus is just contracting and you know, it may be an issue where you need to look at your emotions in that area and start to reevaluate how you're hanging on to something. It might be time to let some things go. Now, the fourth center, the emotional center, is the thyroid, the neck, well, the neck vertebrae, all the cervical area, the teeth, the mouth, and the gums. And all of those have to do with communication and expression, with asserting one's will in the outer world. Now, a lot of these are really easy to keep up with because when you think about the neck, you think about that your throat is in your neck, and that helps you to communicate. Now, I know for a long time I had issues with my throat. Whenever I got tired, I would get a sore throat. That had to do with communication. So I had to finally look at how I was not communicating, especially when I get angry. I tend to go write it down. I don't express it necessarily to the people who are making me angry. And there's a way to do it. You can talk to anybody. And my parents used to tell us that all the time. You can talk to anybody. It's all in how you say it. You can say anything. It's a matter of how you phrase it. So I have, through the years now, begun to express my anger, my discontent when I'm unhappy about a situation. I let people know, and I have not been having sore throats. I don't get them anymore. And they were chronic whenever I got tired. And that I would get tired on a consistent basis, just tired. I was probably tired of a lot of things, but I would overwork myself. I would work too long because I need to make this deadline. I need to meet this due date. But I got to a point where I said, I just can't do that anymore. It's impacting my body, and it would impact my throat area. That's where it manifested for me because I was not communicating. And it would be different for each one of us. Everybody has a different area where they're impacted on a consistent basis based on what emotion you're hanging on to and based on what area of your body you have propensities in. And actually, in astrology, they show that each house or each sign has a body part associated with it, and that tends to be the area of weakness or potential weakness for that person. So you need to pay attention to that part of the body. And for me, it's the kidneys. And I've been very careful about my kidneys over the years because of that. But it shows that those propensities are there to actually become weaker in times of stress. And when we hang on to emotions, we cause stress in our bodies. We become out of balance. The the sixth area, the sixth emotional center, is around the head. It includes the brain, the eyes, the ears, and nose, and that's associated with matters of perception. And that can also include paranoia, according to Mona Lisa Schultz. And it also includes knowledge and wisdom versus ignorance. So, of course, when we think about our heads, we think about our brains. Those are the ones that carry our knowledge. So it makes sense to think about that being the emotional center for our knowledge. Our perception takes place typically through our eyes. When one of the tests they give when you take a driver's test is whether you have depth perception or not, whether you can actually see how close something is and how far it is. And emotionally, we have a type of perception also. We have a perception of whether we're able to judge how close someone should be, something should be. So it's not just what we see with our eyes, but it's what we feel, what the emotional aspect of our eyes. That's the perception of how we perceive how people approach us, how we perceive how people are are looking at us, whether we think they're judging us or whether we're judging other people. All of that has to do with our perception. That's all part of that emotional center. The seventh emotional center is the encompasses the muscles, the connective tissue, and our genes. Now, the emotions and behavioral patterns tied to this center have to do with a sense of purpose in life and a sense of connection to God or the divine. And again, people who are familiar with the chakras would naturally see that seventh chakra appear as being connected with this seventh emotional center that has so much to do with our purpose in life. We come here with a purpose, and when we're not fulfilling our purpose, that's when we can have emotional problems. We can have some type of breakdown because we're not doing what we came here to do. And subconsciously, we know it. We know what we came here to do, and oftentimes we get involved in careers that have nothing to do with our purpose because that's what other people want from us. That's what is expected of us rather than what we really enjoy doing. So when we start to she says other issues revolve around feelings of unlimited possibility in the world as opposed to a sense of despair and predestination. We do get into a sense of despair sometimes because we aren't doing what we're meant to do. We aren't doing what we know we're purposed to do. And subconsciously, it manifests in our bodies through our emotions. And we may hang on to that anger on a lower level subconsciously because we know we're not doing what we would love to do. Typically, what I found is that typically we express what we're meant to do between the ages of 2 and 5. Somewhere along the line, we start doing that. But as we get older, we start to go through these cycles of life and we don't individuate, or we stay connected to what other people expect of us, and we forget about what those things we were doing between 2 and 5. It may have been drawing, it may have been dancing, it may have been writing. You may have been into history, asking questions about every single thing, and people teach you, stop asking so many questions, stop being so nosy. These people didn't come over here to see you, and so you back down. You stop doing what you came here to do. You start to lose your purpose, and consequently, you develop some issues in your body, and those issues in your body start to tell you a story. We have to start to pay attention to the story our bodies are telling us, because our bodies hold the key to perfect health. Our bodies will tell you when they feel unhealthy. Our bodies will tell you when they're out of balance. I went overseas once with some friends, and I got into a situation where I was extremely angry. But because it didn't feel safe to express the anger, because I was in another country, I was away from my home support system, and the people I was traveling with were the cause of the anger. So it didn't feel safe to express my anger with these people. About the fourth day, I got so sick I developed a headache. And again, it has to do with my perceptions of what is going on. I was very angry about what was going on, and I developed a fever. I was burning up. And think about that terminology. When we think about anger, that's the kind of terminology we use, that heat terminology. I was burning up. Girl, I was just boiling. I was hot. That's the language of anger. And I developed a fever because I was angry. And I didn't recognize it at first. I didn't know why I had this fever. I didn't know why I was experiencing this. As I started to recognize what was going on, I knew I had to pull myself away from the group, and I went and threw up. My body simply let me know I cannot stomach this anymore. Listen to the terminologies we use. We use the language, but we don't associate it with ourselves. I couldn't stomach it anymore. I had to get it out of me. So we have to start paying attention to our bodies. If I had ignored that, who knows how sick I would have become, because I might have just held it in. It could have turned into very toxic in my body. And that's what happens a lot of times when we hold on to emotions. It becomes toxic. It gets into your system and it stays there until it becomes dis-ease. It might become a liver disease. It might become a urinary tract infection. And that happened to me once before too. I developed a urinary tract infection because of some of the associations. I was not functioning well in certain relationships I should have severed myself from, but I didn't. And so my urinary tract decided I'm going to be inflamed. But as soon as that relationship ended, so did the infection. So we have to pay attention. We have to learn the language of the body. Now, my mother always used to tell us, you need to know your body now because the doctor doesn't know your body the way you do. And that's the truth. We live with ourselves all the time. We know who we are. We know what we like. We know what we can accept. But we've often been taught, but we've often been taught to go against what we know. So we have to relearn our bodies, because our bodies, they know the story. Our bodies are wise. They'll let us know, but we have to learn the language of our bodies. We have to pay attention so that we can stay healthy. Now, at one time, I learned that there were certain emotions associated with certain organs in our bodies. Now, from what I've studied now, all the teachers are saying, no, that's not so. But fear used to be associated, and it may still be associated with cancer, the disease cancer, not the zodiac sign. And so people who remain in a state of fear often develop cancers, and they develop them in the areas of their body that are associated with the emotional centers. So it's really important that you start to recognize how you're expressing your emotions or not expressing them, because it's imperative that that energy continue to flow throughout your life. Energy becomes toxic when it stays stagnant. You have to let that energy flow through you. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you going through this journey into wholeness with me. And if you've enjoyed it, send the link to your friends. Tell everybody you know about the journey into wholeness. Tell them that we meet. We have one more session. We may continue throughout 2019, but for sure we have one more session on December 16th, and we'll be talking about intuition. But in the meantime, subscribe to this YouTube channel. Tell your friends to subscribe to the channel. Once you subscribe, you'll get a notification whenever we go live. And to help with our programming, feel free to send donations. We can always use donations. We can always use help with keeping our studies going and teaching other people. And you can go to PayPal at wholeselfministries@gmail.com. That's WHOLESELF ministries@gmail.com. Or if you're not into PayPal, you can mail checks, money orders to P.O. Box 830-964, Tuskegee, Alabama 36083. And you can also get more information at www.wholeselfministries.org, or you can call 833-BE-WHOLE. That's 833-BEWHOLE. And if I'm not available, I will call you back. Again, I appreciate you. I thank you for joining me. I thank you for allowing me to share. And until we meet again, I invite you to be peaceful, productive, and empowered. Shem Hotep.